There comes a moment in every story where silence ends, not with vengeance, not with screaming, but with truth, unfiltered, unshakable, and long overdue. You see, revenge is loud. It burns quickly. It demands attention. But truth is patient. It waits, it watches, and when it finally speaks, it doesn't scream, it simply reveals. And that revelation, it hits deeper than any act of revenge ever could. Because when the truth comes back, it doesn't just expose what they did to you. It reveals who they've always been. This isn't about anger. This is about awakening. Because the people who tried to rewrite your reality, who made you question your worth, your voice, your memory, they never imagined that truth would outlive every lie they told. But it does. And when it hits, it doesn't ask for permission. It levels everything they built on broken foundations. Truth doesn't seek revenge, it reveals the cost of deception. There's something profoundly misunderstood about truth. People often treat it like a tool to win arguments or justify actions. But truth, in its purest form, isn't interested in revenge. It doesn't chase down those who betrayed you with fire and fury. It doesn't wear armor or carry weapons. It simply waits. And when it arrives, it does what revenge never could. It confronts people not just with what they did, but with what they've become because of it. You can try to outrun a lie. You can bury it in charm, drown it in manipulation, or silence it with influence. But the truth has a way of surviving under the surface. It matures in the quiet. It grows in the spaces where no one is watching. It gains strength, not from noise, but from integrity. And when it finally emerges, it doesn't need to explain itself. It shows what was real all along. What many don't realize is that deception always has a cost. Not always in the moment, often not immediately, but eventually the one who lied, who twisted reality to serve their pride or agenda, will be forced to confront the damage they've done, not just to others, but to themselves. And this is the part people forget. When you lie to someone else, you often start lying to yourself. You begin to edit your own memory. You rewrite the story so that you don't look like the villain, even when your actions scream otherwise. That self-deception, over time, doesn't protect you. It poisons you. It eats away at your peace, your confidence, and your ability to connect with reality. So when the truth finally shows up, when it becomes undeniable, it doesn't just call out the betrayal. It reveals the deterioration of the one who betrayed. This is why truth hits harder than revenge. Revenge satisfies the surface. It might feel like justice in the moment, but it rarely changes anything. Truth, on the other hand, alters the entire foundation. It forces people to look at the mirror they've avoided for years. It breaks the false identity they built to hide their guilt. And the weight of that collapse is far greater than any punishment someone else could deliver. So if you've been hurt, deceived, manipulated, understand this. You don't need to chase revenge. You don't need to scream to be heard. Just stand in the truth. Let it speak for you. Because when the dust settles and the illusions fall apart, the truth doesn't just expose them. It redeems you. The lies they use to control you become the chains that bind them. Control built on deception is never stable. It may appear effective at first, subtle manipulation, selective truths, strategic silence. Some people become masters at shaping your reality, making you question your instincts, your memory, even your identity. They don't need to raise their voice or issue threats. They just twist things ever so slightly until you start doubting yourself and trusting them more than your own intuition. But here's the truth they never anticipate. The same lies they use to control others eventually become the very prison that traps them. Because when you build your sense of power on falsehood, you're forced to keep lying, not just to others, but constantly, relentlessly to yourself. You must maintain the illusion at all costs. You must silence anything or anyone that threatens to tell the truth. And slowly that vigilance turns into paranoia. They begin to live in fear, not because someone is out to get them, but because deep down, they know what they've done. They know the truth they suppressed has not disappeared. It lingers, it waits. And that awareness breeds anxiety. They can't trust the very people they manipulated because they know how easy it is to twist loyalty. They can't find rest because control requires constant maintenance, and lies require constant rewriting. The person who manipulates others for power becomes a prisoner of their own creation. Their world shrinks, not from outside pressure, but from internal decay. They can't let anyone close because closeness means exposure. They can't be vulnerable because vulnerability invites truth. So they isolate themselves behind a fortress of ego, pride, and denial, only to find that the walls they built to keep others in line now keep them from freedom. Meanwhile, you, the one who was once under their control, begin to awaken. You start to reconnect with your voice. Your sense of worth returns, and you see their tactics clearly for what they were. Fear disguised as authority, weakness masquerading as dominance. You begin to rise, not with rage, but with clarity, and that clarity is terrifying to someone whose power depended on your confusion. This is why truth is so dangerous to those who manipulate, because it doesn't just expose a lie, it strips away the identity they built around it. And without that lie, who are they? They're left facing a version of themselves they never wanted to meet. Not the image they show the world, but the one they buried under years of deceit, denial, and control. So if someone tried to control you through distortion, manipulation, or fear, understand this: you don't need to retaliate. You don't need to stoop to their tactics. Just keep walking in truth, because eventually the same lies they used to bind you will become the chains that suffocate them. Time is the ally of truth and the enemy of false narratives. Lies are designed to act quickly. They operate like smoke, fast to spread, easy to believe in the moment, and often hard to trace. When someone spins a false narrative, they're usually banking on immediacy. They want to influence perception before questions start forming. They want to control the story before reality has time to speak. And for a while, it works. Falsehood often wins the sprint, but time was never meant for sprinters. It favors endurance. And the truth, real, unshakable truth, always plays the long game. That's what deceivers forget. They forget that memory matures, that wounds might bleed for a season, but scars tell the real story. They don't realize that time gives clarity, that as days turn into months and months into years, the emotions that once clouded judgment begin to settle. And in that stillness, what's real begins to rise, slowly, steadily, without effort. A false narrative can live for a moment, but it cannot survive a lifetime. It requires maintenance, attention, and constant reinforcement, because the moment people start to think for themselves, the moment the noise fades and the silence settles in, the inconsistencies begin to show. And that's when the cracks appear. One detail doesn't align, one truth slips through, one witness remembers, and the entire illusion begins to crumble. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it's not even intentional most of the time, but the truth over time becomes undeniable. It's like gravity. You can deny it, argue with it, pretend it doesn't exist, but eventually everything returns to it. The weight of what actually happened becomes heavier than the story that was told. And those who clung to the lie start to feel that pressure, not from you, not from vengeance, but from reality itself. This is why time is truth's greatest ally, because time doesn't need to prove anything. It doesn't argue, it reveals. It exposes what cannot last. And when that moment comes, when the truth surfaces after years of distortion, it doesn't just correct the story, it rewrites the meaning of everything that came before it. People who believed the lie begin to question what else was hidden. The ones who stood silent begin to regret their silence. And those who thought they won by deception begin to realize that all they did was delay the inevitable. So if you've been falsely portrayed, misunderstood, or manipulated, be patient. You don't need to rush your defense. You don't need to match their urgency with your own. Let time do what it does best. Strip away what isn't real. Because the longer the lie lives, the more devastating the truth becomes when it finally arrives. Revenge is emotional, but truth is existential. Revenge is tempting, especially when you've been wronged. It whispers promises of justice, of balance, of seeing those who hurt you feel what you felt. It feeds on pain. And in moments of betrayal, that pain is real and raw. It can feel like the only language they will understand. But revenge, by its nature, is emotional. It acts from the wound, not the wisdom. It burns fast and often leaves you scorched too. Truth, on the other hand, is different. It isn't rooted in emotion. It isn't reactive. It's foundational. It goes deeper than payback. It doesn't just confront actions, it confronts identity. While revenge says, I want you to feel what you made me feel, truth says, you will see who you've become. And that realization cuts far deeper than anything revenge could ever deliver. Because when you seek revenge, you're still in orbit around the one who hurt you. Your actions, your decisions, even your peace becomes tied to their downfall. You're waiting to see them fall so you can feel free. But that gives them too much power. Truth doesn't do that. Truth liberates you first. It restores your ground, your voice, your clarity. And once you're standing there, you don't need to destroy anyone. Their own lies, choices, and distortions will do that work for you. This is the quiet power of truth. It speaks through consequences. It reveals over time that the person who did you wrong wasn't just hurting you, they were destroying their own integrity, sabotaging their own relationships, dismantling their future, piece by piece. Truth doesn't have to punish them. It just lets them live in the reality they created. And here's the part they never saw coming. When you rise, when you rebuild, when you heal without them, it forces them to confront the one thing they tried to avoid all along, themselves. Because as long as you were broken, they could justify their actions. As long as you were stuck in bitterness, they could say you never moved on. But when you stand in quiet strength, grounded in truth, without bitterness or retaliation, it leaves no more excuses. They're left alone with the weight of what they did and who they became in the process. That's why truth is more powerful than revenge. Because revenge might satisfy the moment, but it doesn't change the story. Truth reshapes the narrative entirely. It exposes, it humbles, it corrects, not just for others to see, but for the one who caused the harm to finally understand that the damage they did wasn't just to someone else, it was to their own soul. So if you've been tempted to strike back, to make them pay, pause, look deeper, not because they deserve mercy, but because you deserve peace. And peace doesn't come from proving your pain. It comes from standing in truth and letting it do what no act of revenge ever could, bring the full weight of reality down where it belongs. Those who built their identity on deceit cannot withstand the mirror of truth. When a person chooses to deceive, not once, not in a moment of panic, but as a pattern, a way of being, they aren't just lying to others. They're crafting an entire identity around falsehood. Piece by piece, they construct a version of themselves designed not for authenticity, but for advantage. They tailor their words to gain favor, mask their intentions to maintain control, and wear a carefully curated mask to navigate the world without being truly seen. But the thing about masks is they don't just hide you from others. Over time, they start hiding you from yourself. When someone manipulates, they don't just distort facts. They reshape the entire narrative. They become the misunderstood victim, the righteous hero, or the innocent bystander in their own story. It's not that they forgot what they did. It's that they rewrote the memory so many times it became easier to believe the edited version. And when people reinforce that version, when no one calls it out, it becomes part of who they think they are. This is where the danger truly begins, because once your identity is rooted in deception, the truth becomes a threat, not just to your reputation, but to your very sense of self. They can't afford to reflect. They can't risk asking real questions. What if the answers contradict the story they've been telling for years? What if the truth shows that they were never the victim? They were the one doing the damage. What if everything they believed about themselves is just a fragile narrative built to avoid responsibility? That's why the truth doesn't just inconvenience those who lie. It shatters them, not physically, not publicly at first, but internally. Because the moment truth steps into the room, the lies that once looked like strength start to rot from the inside. The confident persona cracks. The rehearsed excuses no longer convince. And they find themselves standing in front of a mirror they can't turn away from. This mirror doesn't reflect how they want to be seen. It reflects who they really are beneath the stories, beneath the manipulation, beneath the ego. And for someone who has avoided that mirror for years, maybe even decades, that's a terrifying sight. Because now, there's no one left to blame, no one to deflect onto, no distraction strong enough to silence the echo of truth bouncing back at them. And here's the most haunting part. Truth doesn't come with violence. It doesn't arrive screaming or accusing. It simply reveals. And what it reveals, they must live with. The relationships they destroyed, the trust they violated, the people they lost. All of it comes back, not as punishment, but as evidence. Evidence of what they chose and who they chose to become. So you don't have to raise your voice. You don't need to drag them through the mud. The life they built on lies will collapse on its own because the foundation was never real. And while they're collapsing inward, they'll start to see what they missed. The loyalty they took for granted. The forgiveness they abused. The moments they mocked as weakness. That were actually strength beyond anything they ever possessed. Because here's the truth they never calculated for. You didn't just survive, you grew. You healed. You found clarity not through revenge, but through facing your pain head on. Something they were never willing to do. They will try to forget. They'll distract themselves. They'll pretend it didn't matter. But the mirror of truth doesn't break just because they look away. It waits quietly, and eventually, in the stillness of regret, it forces them to see what they lost not just in you, but in themselves. And that loss, that awareness, that's what hits harder than any revenge ever could. Because when you live with lies, you live in fear, fear of being exposed, fear of being seen, fear of being left with no one who truly knows you because you never let anyone in. That's not power, that's isolation. And that's self-inflicted exile. Meanwhile, the person they tried to diminish, the one they underestimated, lied to, and betrayed, is no longer in their orbit. You've outgrown the need for validation. You've stopped trying to make sense of their madness. And that quiet detachment, that silent strength, becomes deafening in their world of noise. This is what they never understood. The truth wasn't just your defense. It was your foundation. It's what carried you through the chaos. It's what allowed you to heal when it would have been easier to harden. And now it's what sets you apart, not as someone who won, but as someone who endured, evolved, and emerged. They will look back one day and see the fork in the road, the moment they could have told the truth, the moment they could have owned the damage, repaired the bridge, or simply been honest. But they didn't. They chose image over integrity. And by the time they realize what that choice cost them, it's too late to undo it. Because you can't unsee the truth. You can't unknow it. And you can't escape the person you became in its absence. So let them talk. Let them twist. Let them pretend. Truth doesn't rush. It doesn't beg. It waits. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't raise its voice. Because it knows those who built their identity on deceit can't survive the mirror,